I'm the guy that's sort of responsible for getting you all here. I'm really happy you all came, and I hope you're having fun in spite of our what seems to be our normal spring weather anymore. We had 75-degree weather a month and a half ago, and the flowers started to bloom and then got frozen, and this kind of weather seems to be our norm now for the last month or so. So
can we do some DS lawn jobs?
What's that?
Can we do some DS lawn jobs?
Lawn jobs? You mean some burnouts or something?
Yeah.
Well, whatever. If Carlisle Vince catches you, you might be in trouble. All right. So anyhow, I'm going to talk about the history of Citroen here in central Pennsylvania. And I certainly don't claim to know everything about the history of it here. And I'm going to give the history as I know it and I remember it, because it seems that I've actually lived the history of Citroen here in this area of the country. I'm going to start way back before Citroen was even on these shores in 1942. And 1942, and again, some of these dates I'm not exactly sure of, but we're going to go with what I'm saying, and I'm within a year or two. That's when the Dellinger family, who were my grandparents, moved here to York County, Pennsylvania, which is southeast of here, from their home in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. My mom was the oldest of 8. Not all of the 8 were born yet at that point. She was 15. And one of the younger siblings that was born at that time included her brother Donald Dellinger, who was around 6 years old. 1946 is another sort of important date, because that's when my dad, Ralph Nauss, married Dorothy, and they had a long married life together. If you want to go ahead and click on the next one.
Who's that? Who's that?
All right, so in 1953, Donald Dellinger, who you probably all have heard of, enlisted in the United States Army. And he spent the most of his enlistment time stationed in England, where his training was to be a tank mechanic.
That's a nice thing.
Red also, I'm sure, was very interested in the cars in Europe while he was over there. And I'm sure he saw a lot of different, very early English and other European cars. He did spend some time in Germany also. I'm not sure how much he spent in France, but I'm sure that he saw a lot of what was going on with the automotive scene in Europe. The next date that's sort of a little bit interesting and maybe sort of important is 1955. And although that happens to be the year that Citroen was coming out with the DS, it also was the year that I was born. So if it would have been for that, I wouldn't be here to bore you today. So in 1956, Donald and his English bride Maureen arrived home from England after the end of his tour of duty. Maureen's expecting their first daughter, and they come back from Europe on a troop ship. And I understand she was sick the whole way here. Wasn't much of a ride to see her new home here in the United States. After getting back to central Pennsylvania, Red, as he would soon become to be known, and his hair was redder than mine, especially back then, I'm sure. He became known as Red in automotive circles, and he landed a job at a place called Foreign Motor Sales on Cameron Street in Harrisburg. The dealership sold every kind of imported car known to man. Most of the stock came from the sort of well-known gentleman who was importing cars here, Max Huffman.
Oh, yeah.
There, Red met and became good friends with another mechanic by the name of Bob Whitcomb, who was in his late 20s at that time. And I was told that their first experience with Citroen was when one was in the shop, and there was the shop had several mechanics who were of foreign origin, and I think the guy was Italian, and they said that he literally, they don't remember what was wrong with the car, but he literally had the engine compartment torn apart, and the parts were spread out in lines over 2 bays of the shop so that he could hopefully get it back together again. And most likely that would have been an early DS-19. We can go to number 3. Okay. Red had moved by this time to a home on Route 177 near the village of Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. And he literally had a tar paper shack on the property that sat in very close proximity to the highway. And he began to work on people's foreign cars there on weekends and at night. And on this picture, if you look very closely, the highway literally went right by the garage and right by the house. It was a little 2-lane road. Paul Anderson will know the portion, and I have some pictures later. It was not a very wide road. It was not very well traveled. It was sort of out in the middle of nowhere. So eventually Red talked Bob into coming to work with him in the tar paper shack and hung a shingle outside for Red's Foreign Car Service. It wasn't easy to make a living. Red worked on everything, and Volkswagen was a huge part of that clientele. Go ahead. Okay. Although I could find no proof of exactly when he hung his shingle, he applied for the name officially in the state of Pennsylvania on October 26, 1960. Of course, you can see a 15.6. There'll be more about that later. And I believe this is a Jaguar. And if you want to go to the next one. And you can see the highway is right by the side of the shack. There's a Renault Dauphine sitting there. And if you look at the picture in detail, you can see the sign for Red's Foreign Car Service. And we can go to number 6. That's actually the where he filed with the Office of the Prothonotary for a fictitious name for Red's Foreign Car Service. So as the story goes, and of course this was before I was around there very much, although I visited there. As the story goes, one day they were in the shop working and they heard a car coming. And of course, like I said, the road was right beside the shop. So they heard this car coming. It was an early ID-19. The engine was running on 3 cylinders and it was knocking so loudly that they thought it was certainly going to fly apart. The customer who they had never seen before had heard that Red could fix anything. He asked if they could install a used engine in the ID-19, and sort of laughing, Red and Bob said, they could install an engine, but where in the world are you going to get it? The customer said, I'll be back tomorrow. So, sure as poop stinks, the next day they heard the engine knocking and coming again, certainly thinking that it would have blown up a long time ago. But there it was, the ID-19 with a used engine laying in the trunk. The customer had driven from Lewisberry to Gettysburg, which is at least 40 miles one way, and this ID-19 with the engine knocking, and had them load a used engine that he got from a junkyard, and they had him put it in the trunk. They brought it there, and I never really heard the details, but apparently they got the engine changed. The gentleman was on his way. And I often wonder if that wasn't the seed that planted that made Red fall in love with Citroen. After a lot of hard times during which Red and Bob went to work in Harrisburg for the local Volvo dealership, where Bob is a very good friend of mine. I think he's he's 87 now. He still lives in the area. I belong to the same hunting camp with him, and I see him on a regular basis. So a lot of this history came through Bob because he lived it also. So after only a week of working for someone else, Bob was the mechanic, Red was the service writer. Red looked at Bob one morning and said, "I've had enough of this crap. I'm going back to the shack. Are you coming with me?" So, at some point in time, Red actually serviced a whole fleet of Volkswagen buses being used by a Harrisburg-based private school. Of course, that one picture, and I think there's more, showed the 15.6, which Bob tells me they used to go to Harrisburg when a Volkswagen bus broke down. They hooked a chain to it with the 15.6 and towed it back to the tar paper shack. So anyhow, apparently work picked up, and maybe Red's business since also, because within a year or so, Red had purchased another garage less than a quarter of a mile from his home. And that shop was originally built as a school bus repair shop. And there you see the front of it, and you see the 15.6, and that's actually Red's wife and daughters standing in front of the shop. Details are sketchy, but from what I've been told, Citroen in New York apparently had heard about this little guy out in the middle of nowhere. Go ahead. And there's just more pictures of the shop with a D, I think, sitting there. I'm not sure what all. But apparently they found out about this little guy in the middle of nowhere who could repair their cars. They came to him and talked him into becoming an official repair station. Go ahead. I don't think that's Red in the picture. I've been looking at that long and hard, and I don't think that's actually Red. Although I would have been pretty young back then, my brother's shaking his head, and I'm not sure if that might have been somebody from Citroen or perhaps someone that worked for Red, but that's a very early picture also. Go ahead to number 10. All right, and eventually Red, when he started selling Citroens, he built a small showroom onto the side of the repair shop, and eventually started selling Citroen. Although there are photos that seem to be before 1966 that show an official Citroen sales and service sign. He applied for and received approval for the fictitious business name of Red's Citroen Sales and Service on August 23rd, 1966. What I can tell you is I think that Red was selling cars before 66. I'm almost certain of that. But I think what happened was when 1966 rolled around and the DS21 was introduced, I think Red was required to sign another dealer contract, and that was maybe the time when they convinced him to change the name and put Citroen in it. So, Red's location was in the middle of nowhere, about 10 miles from Harrisburg, about 20 miles from York, but that didn't dampen his enthusiasm about Citroen, and he became known far and wide as the guru of Citroen. No sales history that I have yet found exists to tell me how many cars Red sold a year, but there became a fairly robust number of Citroens in the Harrisburg area. I would guess maybe numbering in the range of 200 or more at any one time during the 60s. My brother Bill will probably laugh about this next thing, but it was during this time that my brothers and I were told by our parents that we were absolutely not allowed to ride with Red anywhere under any circumstance, because Red had become known as sort of a maniac behind the wheel. So he had several favorite road tests, and I've heard this from many people. And a little bit later I'll show you some pictures of the highway. But this was back when that was a two-lane road. It was twisty, it was full of turns, it was full of little humps that you couldn't see over. And one of his favorite things to do was take a brand new DS with potential buyer in it and drive down the road and just drive over and put two wheels in the gutter and just drive up the road without losing control and back onto the berm, off of the berm, onto the edge of the road, and prove to people about the ability of a Citroen for road handling. And he had another road test, and again I've heard this from several different people, where he knew a local landowner who had a property that was had frontage on a 90-degree turn in a small back road, and the corner was actually just over or just past a blind hump in the road. So his favorite thing to do was drive down that back road 45 or 50 miles an hour, and when he went over the crest of the hill, you couldn't see what was coming next. By the time you got over the crest of the hill, you were in the middle of a 90-degree turn, and Red drove the car straight off into the field, drove around in a few circles, back on the road, and back to the shop just like nothing ever happened, without even saying anything, I understand.
I like this guy.
And then the funniest thing of all, and Red used to tell this story, was that he took this little old man and woman who were probably in their 70s out for a road test, and he was getting ready to do this, and the husband was in the back, and the wife was sitting beside him, and Red said to the lady, "You or your husband don't have any heart problems, do you?" and I can't tell you what the gentleman's name was, but the wife said, "Harry, you better hang on." So, and this is getting a little bit ahead of my time, of where I'm at on here, but another thing that I can tell you is, I can tell you that it is possible on a Citroen SM, if you drive it hard enough, you can tear a drive shaft right out of the triaxle, because we had a couple salesmen in 72 and 73 who one of their favorite things were to go down the new highway when it was built and be doing as fast as they could possibly go and just spin the car around in the middle of the highway enough times that more than once they came back with a ball popped off of the inner triaxle, and we had to repair them. So they were pretty crazy about what they went through to sell these cars. So anyhow, another, and my brother Bill might have even been there this night. Another night, we won't go back to the pictures, but the shop, and Paul knows where the shop is, but it's completely different now. The old road went right by the front of the shop, and the parking lot might have been 2 car lengths from the shop, and there was a hump in the road. Well, we were there one night, and I don't know if Bill was there or not, but a high school acquaintance of Red, who happened to be a local sprint car driver, was there visiting. It was right after dark. And of course, he was taunting Red about how damned ugly Citroens were, and how in the hell do you sell these things? Red coaxed him into the passenger seat of the car to go for a ride. Now, back in those days, we could stand in front of the shop and we could see, because the road twisted and turned, but it sort of went up a raise, and then it made a turn, and you could see the road for quite a while. So off they go in Red's DS. And at that time, I think he had a DS21 that had been in an accident that he resurrected, and he used it as a demonstration vehicle. But anyhow, as soon as the door was closed, Red took off, and we stood and watched as Red drove the car up the road as fast as he could go, over the bumps, around the curves, and as far as we could see the lights. After a little bit, we saw the lights coming back, and they weren't going any slower. When Red got right in front of the shop, he slammed on the brakes, and of course the DS squatted down on the road and slid until he got right on top of the hump. He turned the wheels hard to the left and went all he could go, and he spun the car around the ring 2 times, partly on the road, partly on the driveway, and again, right back up the road he went. So whenever they got back, and I won't say any names because he's sort of a well-known sprint car driver around here. As soon as the car came to a stop, the race car driver jumped out, muttering something to the effect that Red was one crazy SOB and he'd never get in a car with him again. Here's the best thing of all, I'll never forget the grin on Red's face when he got out of the car. So anyhow, Red was obviously a great salesman, but he was also a really good mechanic. He was probably one of the best. and between him and Bob, they could fix anything on a DS. They both had been to some of the factory schools and really knew their stuff. So anyhow, part of Red's ability to sell Citroen, and I'm sure it wasn't an easy sell a lot of times, but it was based on the fact that he promised and most importantly delivered the best service and support that anybody possibly could. Red began selling the DS19 and the DS19 and ID19. To my knowledge, he only ever sold a very few TCVs. Back in those days, traction Avants did not seem to exist in this area, except the 15.6 which Red had. Red sold enough cars in the early 60s that I've seen photos where the cars were delivered on car carriers. So he was getting 6 or 8 of them in at a time when he was really selling a lot of cars. And Red attended the East Coast debut of the DS21 in '66, which is held at Watkins Glen Racecourse in New York. There the dealers got their first glimpse of the new model and were actually able to drive the cars on the racecourse. This was a huge happening, and the advertising and press that came with it surely must have helped sell the cars. You can go ahead, please. This is a picture of Red and Jack Brabham, who was there actually as the person that Citroen hired to help promote the DS21. And there is some home video footage of that debut with Red driving the cars, but that's maybe for another time. Can you go ahead again? Okay, so I'm not sure, but the next 3 or 4 years are probably the most lucrative for D sales at Red's. Again, I have no numbers to prove this, but my thoughts are all that this was the heyday. And you can see the dealership with Citroen sitting everywhere. But again, this was the old building, which anyone that goes by there today can only recognize part of that. We can go ahead again. In 1967, in January, Red displayed Citroens at the Harrisburg Auto Show. And he did that for years. He did that up until actually after we were done selling Citroen and we're selling Peugeot and Renault. He was at the car show every year. Can you go again? And some of these pictures, if you look at them closely, they had a car that was actually a cabriolet, I believe, that was on a stand with a hydraulic pump running to demonstrate the hydraulics, and I'm not even sure that they didn't show how to change a tire. Of course, I was a pretty young kid then. I don't think I was there for that. And then, of course, the next picture. This is our governor at that time, who met with Red, and this was Michelle Libovici, who was one of their reps during that time. And he was sort of a crazy guy. He one of the stories that I heard about him was when there were 4 of them in one of the DS21s at Watkins Glen. Of course, Red, I'm sure, figured he was the best driver there. Michelle Libovici was sitting beside him, drinking a glass of wine as Red was running the DS for all it's worth. There's a man that knew it. But anyhow, Red set up the DS21 for a big sweeping turn up at Watkins Glen, and Michelle, halfway through the corner, thought Red wasn't doing it right and reached over and grabbed the steering wheel. And Red said that it was a good thing there was actually a field there because they drove off into the infield. And he said had they been in a corner with trees or anything, they probably all would have been killed. But apparently Michelle was sort of a card from what I understand. So anyhow, at the one car show, I think they actually had some kind of a cutaway vehicle also. So anyhow, 1969 came, and along with it, there was a new model to sell, the Mahari. And Red sold those for 2 years, 1969 and 1970. And they weren't big sellers, but he did sell a handful. They were almost, I hate to say this for you Mahari lovers, but they they were almost a laugh in central Pennsylvania. The few that we sold were mostly to people that wanted to use them if they had a cabin out in the mountain or something like that. I don't remember anybody buying them to commute back and forth to work or anything like that. All right, so here comes the next exciting date, June 1970. 15-year-old boy asked Red for a summer job, something to the effect, "I'll do anything you want." Might have been a mistake. Red hired me to start as soon as summer vacation began, so that I started my career in June of 1970. Those first months I don't remember a lot, but I do remember the first car I did anything to was to hand wax a 1970 Citroen wagon that was light blue in color. That first summer I swept the floors, I emptied trash, I did pretty much whatever. Eventually Red or Bob would begin to have me assist to do whatever they might be doing that day. By the end of the summer, Red must have decided I was worth investing more time in. I was told I still had a job if I wanted one. I wasn't old enough to drive, but I remember begging my brother and my mom, especially my brother John, to drive me to work whenever I could possibly go, which was usually on Saturdays. Summer of '71 and more rides to work full time, and August finally came and I was old enough to drive and got my license. And now I was more mobile. When September came, school started in my junior year of high school. My schedule was pretty full. I drove to school early in the morning. As soon as school left out, I got in my car and drove to Red's, which is probably about 20 miles away, and worked until usually around 6 o'clock. And I also worked Saturday mornings. I will note that during this time, for the kids' sake, I still managed to keep an A average in school. Young minds, which I don't have anymore, are a wonderful thing. And although the only previous mechanical background I had was what I learned from my dad, who was a very good mechanic and serviced anything and everything on the apple orchard where he worked, I must have learned, because by the time June of '73 came around, I graduated from high school and walked into a full-time job working on Citroëns and lots of other cars. But during this time, right around that time, there was a lot of changes going on. 1972 was the announcement that the D series would no longer be imported. Department of Transportation bumper laws proved to be the demise of the D in the U.S. That and the fact that they were coming out with the CX in '75, the Citroen management was not going to modify a car to bring into the United States, not just for a year or two. And although D model sales were still being sold in '72, but it was winding down. And to give you an idea, at that time when they needed cars, they rode the train to New Jersey, and 2 or 3, 4 of them at a time would drive the D models back to Pennsylvania. So '72 also saw the SM arrive on U.S. soil, and Red signed a new contract with Citroen to sell the SM, which included a rather large cost to buy all the factory tools and required parts inventory. When it was named Motor Trend Car of the Year, it helped to bring people to the dealership. Okay, we'll go to the next one, please. All right, so this picture's in 1973. 1973 saw a huge change in the landscape at Red's Citroen. Pennsylvania Department of Transportation upgraded and realigned Route 177 to the way it is now. It gave a whole new look to Red Citroen sales and service. It also put right in front of the shop what would become our high-speed test bed for Citroen SMs. And it really was. That highway became known as the Space Highway. It was probably about 8 or 10 miles long, and it basically went from nowhere to nowhere. And now there's a lot of traffic on it. Back in those days, there wasn't. I could tell you the story one day of about a half a mile from the shop when I was in a customer's SM road testing it, doing about 85 miles an hour in the rain, and a Fairview Township cop passed me going the other way. He never even came after me. he knew what was going on. Red had enough run-ins with them. So anyhow, there was a lot of upgrades to the SM, including a 3-liter engine in '73, but the writing was on the wall that the SM was going away too. So Red had to make some decisions. We did sell 1 or 2 SMs in '74, but that was absolutely the end of it. Once Red realized Citroen was leaving the USA, he had to decide what to do. He had a business that would certainly not do anything but decline if he had no cars to sell. So Red took on the next episode, and he signed with Peugeot and Renault. And by the time 1973 model cars were available, we were selling Peugeot and Renault. It was also around this time, I'm sure at the suggestion of Peugeot and Renault, that Red officially changed the name of the business to D. Dellinger Auto Sales. There's a picture of the, that is when after, and I'll get to this, but that's a picture of the new showroom that was part of a new building that Red put up. In '73 or '74 or '75, I guess it was, Red built a new service shop and showroom next to the original building to be able to service Citroen and Renault. We continued to service Citroen and sell used ones, but Citroen began a steady decline over probably the next 6 years. We had a dedicated group of customers who did not give up on their Citroens and either brought them for service or did their own, but sorry to say that most of the cars in central Pennsylvania suffered badly from the salt put on our roads, and most of the cars we saw just gradually decline and become rust buckets. Peugeot and Renault sold like hotcakes, taking up pretty much all of our time in the shop to prepare them for delivery and to service them afterwards. At one time, Red had 6 or 7 different mechanics working at the same time, as well as a service manager, a parts manager, and an assistant. During that time, I remember Citroens coming in so infrequently that they were almost forgotten. Then came 1979, and heartbreak on a couple fronts. AMC and Renault were joining hands and selling cars together. Somebody in management decided Red's location did not match any established franchise area and deemed his dealership agreement null and void. Red began legal proceedings against them. Then, in March of '79, the illustrious 3 Mile Island accident happened, which was probably about 6 miles or 7 miles from Red's shop. And many people, including my family, loaded our cars and went away, and went as far as we thought we had to go to be safe, because nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. As a result of this, the local economy tanked big time. To add insult to injury, Peugeot had come out with a new model, the 505. At first, hoping this could be the vehicle which would put slumping sales of the long-in-the-tooth 504 back on track. Instead, we realized that the 505 had many teething pains. The fit and finish were not up to standard. We sold a few 505s only to have them come back for a 600-mile service, with customers supplying sometimes 2 to 3 notebook pages of problems that they were having with the cars. And I have to tell you this, Red was a wonderful salesman, and Red sold what he believed in. Red no longer believed in Peugeot. Because of the problems we were having, it broke his heart, I think, and he could no longer truthfully sell the car as what he thought it should be. By early 1980, Red made a big decision. I'm not sure of the date, but it was early in the year. and the word came down that everyone was laid off, including me, and the dealership closed. So Red went through all what was needed to be done. He sold the Peugeot parts back to Peugeot, gave up the dealership, and I think it was a big surprise to all of us. No one was expecting that. So, while all of this was happening, the interest in Citroen seemed to start to come back. What had been declining interest all through the 70s now seemed to be starting again. Parts were not very easily available because the D in Europe was just nothing but another used car. So the parts were more difficult to get in 1980 than they are now, by far. Within a week, before I even got my tools out of the shop, Red called me to meeting. He had a new plan. He'd reopen the shop, but only the old part of the building. We'd continue to service vehicles, but his new undertaking would be to work on Citroen again and start to restore cars. I was the only mechanic that he was going to rehire, and he put his full faith in the fact that he and I would be able to make this new venture a success. At that point, we had people with totally rusted out D models that were in good running condition, but the bottoms were rusted out, and they were starting to come back to us to rebuild those cars and put them back on the road. We found that once the word got out, Citroen work started to trickle back in. We resurrected many DS for customers who had given up on their long-time cars due to rust. Rust panels were not readily available, so we made everything from scratch and spot welded everything back together. We found new sources for parts because the Citroen as a parts source was pretty much gone because they only had to support the cars for 7 years after they pulled out of this country. Red hired a full-time parts man and some other miscellaneous people, but we never hired another mechanic. And we tried. We tried to get mechanics. None of them seemed to be able to have the mindset it took to do the kind of work that was expected. Although Red never lost the love of Citroen and the desire to sell them, eventually he realized more money was to be made in selling late model used cars. Red started to spend more and more of his time buying Ford Tauruses at auction and selling them on a used car lot. It was during this time also that Red suffered health issues, including open heart surgery. He settled out of court with AMC, but not before spending at least 4 years of his life going to New York City for depositions and basically being badgered by lawyers. He would have probably been better off spending his time doing something better and not worrying about the lawsuit. So here we go, 1985. Big date, big time for Brad. Does anybody want to guess? How about you back here in the green? 85, I met my love of my life, Anna Mae. We got married in 86, and this is really important because without her support, I would not be in business. Sometime around this time, Red's shop and my car were featured on an episode of Motor Week produced by Maryland Public TV. I think you might be able to find it on YouTube yet today. So for the next years, we were restoring Citroens, repairing Citroens, selling Citroens. We had a full-time paint and body person, but as I said, Red never did hire any other mechanics for very long. Red's standard for repair and restoration was very high. We just couldn't find the right people. We can go ahead again. I'm not sure what number are we on.
This is 19.
All right, then we're right. All right, so yeah, we're at the right place. All right, so this was a picture of the dealership after Red included a, I think it was about 8 bays of repair shop and a new showroom. That was built in the mid-70s and pretty much, well, I'll show you. It doesn't look quite like that today, but we can go ahead again, please. There's another picture in the winter, but you can see we had a lot of D models. We had a lot of all kinds of cars sitting there back in those days. We can go one more to 21. You can see we had quite a lineup of used Citroens. Most of those cars were not really for sale, but were being stored, hoping to eventually get to them to restore them.
2CV in the back?
Yeah, there's usually a 2CV or two around. I tell you what, if you want to back up to the one that shows the, keep backing up.
I got a question for you, Brad. There's an AMI in there. Where'd
Yeah,
that
oh
come
yeah.
from?
We had an AMI there we were restoring. It's probably a light blue one.
Okay. All right.
If you don't mind going back, and then I'll point out something.
How far back?
Keep going. Right there. Can you blow that one up a little bit? First of all, how many of you have ever been to Red's shop? All right, cool. All right. So let me point out something here. This was my brand new 1973 Chevy Nova that I bought when I was a senior in high school. That didn't make Red happy. Sitting back here is Red's Cabriolet, which all of you have seen, I'm sure, either in pictures or here at Carlisle, but it was sitting under a tarp. And the interesting thing about that is he traded that car in on a 1967 Citroen station wagon. That's how he got that car. There's also a really, really rare, very interesting car sitting right here, which was an early 30s Delahaye, which used to attract all kinds of attention. That's why Red put it in the back, because if it was anywhere that anyone could see it from the road, even though it was in need of total restoration, people stopped all the time. Of course, Red had a Citroen brake or station wagon with his fishing boat on top. So, sort of interesting times. Okay, so we can go back to number 21 now. All right, so 1993 is another big year. Red, and I figured this out, I actually thought he was older too. A lot of people came to Red's shop and thought he was in his 70s or in his 60s. Red was 57 years old in 93. And although the operation over the last 5 years had allowed him the flexibility to take multiple vacations and travel, I remember at least one time he went away for 3 months, and I ran the whole operation. He realized that time was moving on, and he decided he wanted to retire and sell the property. Although many promises had been made in 1980, and there was interest in me of buying the business, we could not come to terms on my purchase of the property and the business. We negotiated and came up with a deal for me to buy just the parts inventory and operate at that location selling only parts. I felt confident this purchase was going to take place in early 1994. My wife will remember this. December 28th or 29th of 1993, Red tells me he's reconsidered our negotiated deal and the sale was off and I was no longer employed. I loaded my tools and drove home to give the news to Anna Mae and the kids who were 2 and 4 years old. You guys don't remember it.
Good thing.
I will tell you that Jennifer knows about it. She doesn't know about it, but the first year or two of her life, anytime she went with me, she was in the back of a DS sedan in a car seat. And she was too young to remember it. So anyhow, Red put the building up for sale, left it be known in Europe and all over that his parts inventory was for sale. And for the first few months, things were pretty much in limbo. I don't know if he sold any parts at that time or did any work. After a trip to Europe to try to sell the parts with no takers, he returned home. We can go to 22, please. I'm not sure what these all. Okay. All right. So the next 5 pictures, and you can scroll through them as fast as you would like. This is what the place looked like after the dealership closed. And give you an idea of just how many cars, and in addition to the lot that you saw before sitting full of cars, when Red gave up, that was the 6 or 8 bay repair shop was sitting completely full of D models and SMs and the Citroen C6 that Red had bought. It was sort of a crazy time. There was also an upstairs loft that was completely full of all kinds of stuff. So, back to me. After working for 2 months at the local AMC Renault dealer, and by the middle of March 1994, I'm sorry? Oh, okay. So during that time, and Carter will probably appreciate this, I was working on Renault Alliances and all this stuff that was old and miserable, and there were recalls for replacing the heater cores in them. And guess what? I was a French car mechanic. So the guys at the AMC Jeep shop thought it was the greatest thing ever that all that crap came to me. It wasn't a lot of fun. So anyhow, by the middle of March '94, I had heard that Red had not sold the parts. Anime and I did a lot of long and hard thinking how to proceed. I went back to Red with a new offer. The offer was unchanged from our previous, except that I had found a new location, and if I bought the parts, I would move it ASAP. Red accepted my offer, and he probably didn't have much other choice because I think he had tried everything he knew. Brad Nauss Automotive was born, and it was April of '94, if I remember right. As soon as I could arrange it, I paid for the parts. I rented a huge a U-Haul truck with a loading ramp, and just over 1 day, I had removed all of the parts from the shelves, hauled them to the new business location, in addition to all the part shelves, desks, customer information, etc. And I was a young guy then, and it would kill me now, as it was a long day. So Red continued to buy and sell Citroens after this. I think he even restored a couple. He negotiated with 2 other people, eventually sold the D-Series used parts to one person, and the SM used parts and cars to another. My dad worked for him part-time, and Red continued to sell Fords on the lot. A few years went by till Red sold his business property and moved to a new residence near Mechanicsburg, where he built a new house and a pole building which became his shop. Shortly after the move, we can go to the next one if we could, it should be number 27.
Yep.
There's a picture of Red and his wife Maureen and his favorite car in front of their new home and shop. Shortly after they moved, Red's wife Maureen was diagnosed with ALS. Red was devastated, and he spent the next few years caring for her as the disease slowly took her life. Red never quit working on Citroens or buying and selling Citroens. Sadly, Red passed away on the evening of June 17, 2008. When the coroner went to Red's residence that night, he found a DS-21 sitting in the driveway with fender covers on the front fenders and Red's tools laying on top. He'd obviously been working on the car when he fell ill and called an ambulance due to his heart condition. Citroen in central Pennsylvania being kept alive by several collectors who have cars here. So it's not totally unusual to see a Citroen on the road. Paul recently got one. Our friend George Lewis has a small fleet of them. I have one. So anyhow, as the owner of Brad Nauss Automotive, I pride myself in what I offer to my customers. Good quality parts at a fair price, along with 43 years of experience to help with their parts needs. I hope that part of Citroens in central Pennsylvania will continue for years to come. The end. Does anybody have any questions about that?
You can't ever retire, by the way.
Okay.
You can die though.
What was
That's true.
the profile of the Citroen buyer that came to Red's? Weird.
Well, what I can, and again, I was pretty young back in the old days, but what I can tell you from my memory, a lot of the customers that were local people that had them were professional people. There were a lot of doctors and lawyers, and a lot of engineers, people that appreciated the mechanics of the Citroen. I can also tell you that a lot of people were afraid of them. The standard comment, if anyone knew or you talked to, if you told them you worked on Citroen, they said, "Oh, that damn plumber's nightmare." So that was the mindset of a lot of people. A lot of people were totally afraid of them. The other thing that I can tell you about Citroen, and you probably all know this, Citroens were pretty damn expensive. You know, my dad, for instance, was a Chevy guy, and he could buy a pretty damn nice Chevrolet for what you could buy an ID19 for. And I don't think that made Red very happy sometimes, but my dad never did sway. My dad never bought one from him. But yeah, I would say that a lot of them were professional people that could afford them and could appreciate them. Dave?
You know, the guy that I worked for only sold 52 cars from 1968 to 72. Do you have a rough guess of how many Red sold? I mean, is it thousands?
Well, again, you know, my gut feeling is, and you know, by the time I bought the parts business and got the customer list, there were literally probably 750 names on the customer list, but a lot of them were parts only. Again, I would say that he probably sold, I would guess at least 50 a year. I don't know. I wish I could find, there's supposed to be a book that has that in it, and I wish I could find it.
I actually have the records of the Citroens that your uncle sold from 1966 to 1971.
Okay.
And I can provide you with this information. I got it from the gentleman whose name I can't remember, was the old elderly gentleman who was the marketing manager for Citroen.
Okay.
I can't think of his name right now. Don Leach. Don Leach gave me all his records.
I would love to see a copy.
Yeah, I'll be
of that.
happy. I can.
Do you have any memory of how many?
Well, I mean, it's all listed out. It basically says Reds by month, by year and by month, and the model type and the number. And
I would love to see a copy of that, and if I do, I'll send an email to all you people to give you those numbers. And if you're willing for me to do that.
provide you. I'd be happy to. I'd actually provided the information to the Citroen V folks to publish, but I have not seen that they actually published any of the information.
Okay.
So I could copy them and fax them to you.
All right.
As I recollect, on an annual basis, maybe 50 a year.
All right. That would be my gut
It
feeling.
fluctuated from year to year, but again, the hot times from like from 1966. And as you get to like the early 70s, the numbers fall off a little.
I think by the time I started working there, the sales were not nearly as strong as they were in the mid 60s.
Yeah, like 67, I think was like 67 was like the year that most of the cars were sold. But yeah, I can get you the statistics.
I appreciate that, and if you're okay, I'll pass it along to the other people.
Yeah, probably.
Hey, Brent, the last time I was over at your uncle's place, before he passed away, he had a truck over there, a diesel Citroen
All right,
truck.
I'll tell you about that here in a minute.
Yeah, okay, that's what I want to know.
Let me finish it. Well, I'll tell you about that. Okay. I don't think I have any pictures of that. Red found out about a diesel pickup truck that was sitting in the desert, and I think it was in Arizona. And the story behind it, and pretty much all of the history, came with the truck. The truck had originally been ordered for someone in Los Angeles by Challenger Motors, who was actually importing Citroen and putting their nameplate on them back in the 30s. I think all of us thought it was a Perkins diesel engine in it, but after a lot of research, and a lot of this was just very recently, Citroen in 1936, and before that they were doing R&D, but in 1936 they were the first car company to sell a Citroen with a diesel engine in it, which from what I've read was a year before Mercedes did. And the engine was one that was designed by a gentleman by the name of Ricardo, who was an Englishman. And the story, and actually the person that now has that truck sent a lot of that to me. From what we can find, there were only 3,000 of that engine made up until the war, and there were no more made after that. this truck came into Challenger Motors as the chassis with the diesel engine in it and the drivetrain. It had everything from the dashboard forward, but no windshield, and it had the Citroen front sheet metal and running boards. And then the guy at Challenger, who I think whose name was Charlie Derschel or something like that, they made it a 1933 Ford cab to it. And if you would have seen it up close, it was at his sale. You would not have known hardly that it wasn't meant to be there. So that truck, Red actually had running, and I understand drove it on his property. But before he passed away, there must have been a cold spell, and he didn't have coolant in it, and the block cracked, and the cylinder head. And I said to someone, I'll bet if I'd have been outside in Mechanicsburg, which was 4 miles away, I'd have probably heard it, you know, when he realized that. But anyhow, that truck was sold at his auction, and actually one of my dad's cousins, my second cousin, who actually painted my car in 1983, used to work for Red. He bought that truck at the auction because he didn't want to see somebody buy it just for the Ford cab. So he had done he had completely stripped the sheet metal off of it and repaired all the rust and had it in sealer, put it back together. A Thursday about a month ago at 11:45, I posted on my Facebook page that it was for sale. By 5 o'clock that night it was sold. No dickering, no nothing in it. Right now it's on a truck, should be getting back to California this week. And the guy's planning on restoring it and get it back in running condition. Very, very rare
The
vehicle.
same engine, or they worked on the engine, or
I'm sorry?
did they put the same engine back on?
Oh yeah, it's got the same engine in it. He's going to try to have it repaired.
Oh, okay.
Because it's still got compression. It's actually just the coolant. It's the water jacket that's got a problem. So
In the 80s, I was over there at Challenger's Motors. It was still
oh yeah,
under Challenger's Motors.
I used to sell parts to Challenger Motors.
I used to buy some for my SM.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to go into another spiel. Go ahead.
I'm going to go down a couple of non-Citroen that you talked about. The first one, your 71 Nova, did it crab like every other one I've ever seen?
No, I'll tell you what, that 73, it was a 73 Nova, and I did a lot of crazy shit in that car. My kids shouldn't hear about it. But I never had any problems with it.
Does your wife know about some of that stuff?
Well, the worst one I could tell you about it, Paul has probably driven this road between Lewisberry and Newburytown.
Yeah.
You go down there, there's a big sweeping turn. And I was a teenager and I was pretty stupid. And being one of these salesmen who used to tear the front axles apart on an SM, we're going for dinner one night. And I'm driving my Nova. Well, we're exceeding the speed limit. I mean, way exceeding this. I'm doing like 100 miles an hour. And we come up on this corner. We come up on this corner and the guy, I start leaving off and he says, "What's wrong with you? This thing will take that corner." we took that corner at 100 miles an hour. I'd never do it again. Because it's a miracle that we didn't end up in the brush.
You could have been selling
Change your
Citroen
underwear after
DSs
that?
too.
I could have been. Yeah, I could have been. Like I say, I was crazy back in those days.
Now the second half of mine was the Delahaye. Do you know where it went?
I wish I did. It eventually, I mean, Red had so many people wanting to buy it that I never really knew exactly where it went. The last I heard, it was sold to someone in Harrisburg, but I have no idea where it went after that. And it was probably one of the most valuable cars that he ever had, if it was restored, you know, not in the condition it was in. And I have no idea. He probably traded it in on a car or something. I don't know. All right, so shall we? I have another very short talk about Citroens at Carlisle. So, in 1984 or 85, and I'd love to know if anybody here was there, Red had a pig roast at his dealership. Dave, were you there?
I was at one of the cases.
Okay, so I'm not sure. I lived through this, but I can't tell you for sure. But he either had one or two in a row where we invited everyone from the Citroen Car Club of Ohio, the Quaker City Citroen Club in Philadelphia area, all of the customers and all of that, and they all converged on the dealership. We can flip to the next one.
This one's so much fun.
All right, so this picture here, Dave might be in it somewhere. I don't know if we can find him, but I'm pretty sure, and I don't know, I might bring this along tonight for people to look at on my laptop, but I think that's Mike and Charisse Cox right there. I'm almost certain it is. Although I don't necessarily remember them being there. I haven't found Dave. I've found some of my cousins' husbands. So it's sort of interesting. And you can see there was a huge turnout. You know, by '85 there was a lot of interest in Citroen again. You know, so anyhow, the next picture, please. Everybody might remember this guy. His name was Don Singer. He was a mechanic at Red's shop back in probably the late in the early '80s, I guess it would be. Late '70s, I'm sorry. But anyhow, he eventually went into the business of selling pork barbecue. He did pigs on a big spit, and he did a pig roast at Red's for a couple years, and then eventually here. So anyhow, 1985 or thereabouts, and I don't know, this is all sort of hearsay, and I was hoping that maybe Bill Miller would be here because he could confirm it. But Red went to talk with Bill and Chip Miller. They were two young guys that started Carlisle Events. It was called Carlisle Productions back then. And Red put a bug in their ear about the need for an import show. And I'm sure that Red promised that if they did it, he'd get a bunch of Citroens here. And eventually they did, and I think it was at Red's encouragement, I think that they decided to have an import show. And you know, the Saabs can have it now, but back in those days, Citroen was king here. The first year or two of this import, it was called the Import Festival. Citroen was the show. We can go to the next one.
What year was the first import?
1986.
Okay.
All right, so the 1986 Import Festival. Citroens arrive in mass. Red sponsored a pig roast, but it was here at the fairgrounds. Don Singer provided the food, and a great time was had by all. This actually, I don't know, some of you old Citroen people, like Carter may know this young man. That's Paul Ivis. He was a service representative for Citroen for years and years, came to our shop. And that was Red presenting him with the Best SM Award. This is his wife, Paul's wife. They live now in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Talked to them within the last year, and they're doing pretty good yet. We can go to the next one, please.
He was in New Jersey, and
yes, his headquarters was in New Jersey. Yep. And you can see we were under the French flag. That's okay. All right, you can see we were under the French flag, and what's interesting is you look at these pictures, you don't see a hell of a lot of other cars in the background. That means that we were here, you know. You can go ahead and click through like the next 8 or 10 as quickly or as slowly as people want to. You can see we had all kinds of SMs, and tractions were big. This traction was, this traction was a Familial that a customer in Maryland owned. That was my car, you know, very, very early on. I can't identify this one. You can go ahead.
Hey Brad, was it raining?
You know, this weather sucks, but I can tell you, this is the 31st one of these, and I'll bet you it has only rained where it's been rain like this maybe 5 or 7 times. So I mean, we've had our weather, but we've had a lot of nice weather too. So this was my traction, and then the Maryland Familial, and then of course Red's Cabriolet. And another picture of those.
Red's Cabriolet went back in France.
Yep, this was a 15.6, a 1949. that Red bought and totally restored, and I think the last I heard of it, it was in Georgia. Again, his Cabriolet. And there was the tent with the pig roast, and you can see it was pretty well attended. All right, so let's see where we're at in this, and then I'll go back to that. All right, well, let's talk about that car. That car was the Madame Michelin 15.6 Cabriolet, and it was actually an original car built by Citroen. They only built a handful of them. This is the only one that's original that survived as of that time that this picture was taken. After that, one came out of the woodworks in California and has now been restored as in Europe. But Red bought that car from Augie Pabst out in the Midwest. We can go to the next one. And it's sort of an interesting picture there because that's Red, of course, in the younger days. That's my dad sitting in the passenger seat. And I don't think he came to see my seminar, but I told Jim Bandy he ought to be here. Jim Bandy is sitting in the back in the rumble seat. And there's a young Brad Nauss sitting beside him. And we can go one more.
Wait, I want to take a look.
No, there's a better one, I think. All right, so there's another picture of my dad and myself, and there's Jim. Jim dressed the part even back in the old days, you know. And we had a Citroen dealer sign laying across the back of the car. Of course, that car, I could tell a lot of stories about that car, but Red was very proud of that car, and he tried a lot of different ways to sell it. He tried to sell it to Michelin Tire Company, and I will tell you, in that picture, it's got brand new Michelin tires on it. He didn't sell it to Michelin, but by God, he talked them out of a brand new set of 5 tires for no charge. But the story goes that Red actually went to the point of going to their headquarters, which then was somewhere down south, and sat with their board of directors and tried to sell them that car for the history it had with Michelin Tire. And I think he had some pretty bizarre offers that he wanted them to pay him, but it never happened. So the car was sold to a collector in Holland. He sold that car along with 2 other ones to a gentleman in Holland who had a whole slew of 15.6s. He restored it in an olive drab color scheme, which I never thought really looked right. Now the car has been sold, I understand, to someone in Germany, and it's actually in a dark green with black fenders with a plum colored leather interior in it. And the pictures I've seen are absolutely amazing how beautiful the car looks that way. It's coming up for auction within the next month. The estimate in Europe is anywhere from 700,000 euros to 1.1 million euros. So again, that car may well be the most expensive car, the most valuable car that Red ever had. So it's got a lot of history right there. Okay, we can go to another one and I'll move on. All right, so for the next few years, Red continues to have pig roasts here, but eventually the person who was in charge of the food vendors here started to charge Mr. Singer 50% off the top of what we wanted to pay for a meal. So by this time, I was sort of getting involved in the Citroen Club of North America, was starting to take over the running of Citroens here at Carlisle, which it wasn't called then. It was called the annual meeting of the Citroen Club of North America. At some point in time, we decided that it was better to pay our $25 and go to a restaurant and sit down and enjoy ourselves than to pay that much to have a piece of pork and sit on the bumper of our car. So, so for the last many years, we were welcomed by our fellow Citroen owner, George Lewis, to his restaurant at Mayapple Golf Course. Then when the Citroen Club of North America ceased to exist, which I believe was in 2011, 2012 with no Citroen Club of North America, I decided that the Citroen meeting at Carlisle had to continue. I rounded up some help and we moved ahead. Citroens at Carlisle seemed like a natural. We're not a club, but a venue. After a few years to settle in, Brad Nauss Automotive now fully sponsors the event. Along with the help of some key volunteers before and during the event, and with the help of everyone else coming and enjoying themselves, we continue the tradition of meeting here in May. Carlisle Events has made some changes over the year. This is the biggest change this year is the combination of the two shows. So, anyhow, if Andrew would be kind enough to go out in the rain, I think the door's open on my Citroen. Would you be kind enough to bring those two things off of the seat? All right, so Citroen has been recognized here an awful lot over the years. It don't matter if they get wet; they'll clean. So the first 2 years of this show, on Saturday, Carlisle Events had official or somewhat professional judges who judged the cars on the show field, and they picked the best car from each country on Saturday, and then on Sunday they picked the overall winner. The first 2 years of the show, I think this one is first. The first year, I won second place overall, and I was beat by a professional restoration shop owner out of Hummelstown, Pennsylvania, with an Austin Healey Sprite. But I got a nice silver ball, which my wife can attest. I spent lots of time trying to polish this. It had not been looked at for probably 30 years. So that was the first year. The second year was an exciting time because I won second place again. And guess what? It was the same guy from Hummelstown, but with a different Austin Healey Sprite. Now, I often wondered if my car would have been British, whether it would have got. But anyhow, this was 1987. What was in this one, Anna?
Silver dollars.
This one was filled to the brim with silver dollars.
Wow.
They're still in our safe deposit box. Never been spent. So anyhow, that was the first 2 years. And then beginning in 2012, Carlisle Events has presented 10 Carlisle Elite Awards each year to cars which are on the show field on Friday by afternoon. Representatives from Carlisle Events choose their favorite 10 cars on the show field. And the Citroen owners who have received this award were in 2012, Chris Mecchia. I think he's here, or he was here. Dale Martin won in 2014, and Brian Peters won in 2015. Beginning in 2012, Carlisle Events started presenting what they called the Winner's Circle Award, which is a Carlisle Events Winner's Circle jacket, saying that you belong to that club. The Citroen owners who have received that award, 2012 was myself, 2013 was George Lois with his DS that he had here yesterday, 2014 was Carl Erb, and 2015 was Dave Agar. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, we got to that one. All right, so the biggest winner of all at Carlisle Events was Red Dellinger in 1990. Back in those days, for about the first 20 years or so of this show, one of the draws to stay until Sunday at 3 o'clock was they drew a winner for the car, for the import car, and they had a pretty nicely restored car just about every year. Anyhow, in 1990, Red won the giveaway, which is a Volvo P1800. All right, so if we could go one more. All right, so, and again, I was hoping that Bill Miller would be here because Bill Miller is the gentleman right here. He is still one of the original owners. He's still alive. The sons now run the operation, but he's still an owner. This gentleman used to be their marketing director, and this is Chip Miller. He was one of the original owners, and actually the one that got the idea to start this whole Carlisle Productions thing. And of course with Red and there was a little more laid back in those days. They didn't have bikini contests, but there was Miss Import Auto Festival of 1990, and she's not in a bikini. All right, so the next picture I'm going to show is dedicated to the Citroen guru of Central Pennsylvania. And if you read what he wrote on this photo, which I actually got from some of his archives, he had open heart surgery 45 days before this picture was taken, and he won that Volvo, and that's probably the biggest smile I've ever seen on his face, ever. So here's to the guru. So does anybody have any questions about Citroens at Carlisle? I hope I haven't bored you too much this afternoon.
No, not at all.
So some of the pictures were not very good quality to copy and scan, but they came out pretty decent.
They were period pieces.
They are period pieces, and I found a lot more. I found literally hundreds of photos from back in those days, and brought back a lot of memories. Really did.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. All right, so tonight, 7 o'clock, arrive at Mayapple Golf Course. Again, if you can bring cash, it's $35 a person, includes gratuity. If you can pay with cash, that's great. If not, they will accept a credit